as it were. And very interesting editorial cartoon in the East African as well. It says, if you can look at that, part of what you see is mine to share. Right? That is Somalia and Somaliland. Part of what you see, and consider that C in quotes there, is mine to share. And we'll be discussing the talks that happened on Monday on the military cooperation with Somaliland. And we'll give you details of that. But for now, we still train our focus here on Sudan and the latest diplomatic stance here with Kenya as well, where it recalled its ambassador, and it seems that we still have the hang-ups of Kenya being accused of being biased in this particular crisis. We want to hear also from Yusuf Hassan, just your contribution on this, and of course you've been keeping your eyes on this particular story.
Yeah, I think the Sudan situation is quite complex in the sense that it's not an issue only between two Sudanese forces, but also it has a very heavy international involvement. And when conflicts are fueled from outside through resources from external powers, then it's much more difficult to find a solution to it. But I think the Kenyan position is misunderstood, both by the DRC and by Sudan. Kenya has a very different political culture. And that political culture is what drives our foreign policy, that we are an open country, we're the only democracy. And every time when Kenya had run into trouble politically, we have been able to manage our affairs in very different way from our neighbors. And somehow at the last minute, we always find a solution that keeps our country on the right side and kind of consolidates our stability as a country. So a lot of our neighbors do not understand that. And Kenya also is the center of political activism, political engagement. All our neighbors conduct their politics here in Nairobi because it's safe, it's an open society. So when political groups from the DRC came to our country and they were meeting in a particular hotel and they announced an alliance, the DRC, which is not a very open and democratic country, was outraged and they recalled their ambassador. Now, the president has received the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. As part of that engagement with all the relevant forces in the conflict in the Sudan, just as he had received President Burhan, the surprising thing is that they recalled their ambassador. To my understanding, they haven't done that with Ethiopia, where Dagalo visited, to Djibouti, to Uganda, to Rwanda, and South Africa. Yes. So my question is, why is Burhan picking on Kenya? And why is this extraordinary focus on Kenya than the other countries? Because I see that it is good for our president to meet everybody in order for us to be able to play a constructive role in finding solutions to the many complex issues that we have in the region. And I think it is right for the president to welcome everyone so that we can understand their point of view and be able to offer a solution. Having said that, though, I think it is very important for countries to understand that we do things differently. There is no country where the opposition, there's such a freedom of press, freedom of association, freedom of opposition in Kenya than any of the other countries, apart maybe from Tanzania. Uganda is highly restrictive, Rwanda is restrictive, Burundi is restrictive, Ethiopia is restrictive. Sudan, of course, no freedom of press and freedom of association exists because there's a collapse of the systems in place. Somalia doesn't have that. And the whole region is walking away from direct political engagement, openness, and the honesty to conduct their foreign policies or their politics in the open marketplace. We are distinctively different from that. And I think we should not change just because a neighboring country does not feel comfortable with our policies. We should be able to engage with everybody without impacting on our national security. What is our interest in Sudan? What is our interest in the DRC? What is our interest in Ethiopia and Somalia? That is what comes first. And I think the president is doing that very well. And it is the right path to be on.
All right, thank you. Unless there's nothing else to add on that, so let's head over to Ethiopia, where we understand that the country held talks on Monday on military cooperation with Somaliland, just a week after a deal with the breakaway Somali region on sea access stoked tension in the Horn of Africa. The discussions in Addis Ababa were held the same day Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud began a visit to neighboring Eritrea. Somalia is seeking international support over the controversial January 1st agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland, a separatist region over which Mogadishu exercises little real authority. The central government has branded the Memorandum of Understanding, which gives landlocked Ethiopia access to the sea via Somaliland, an act of aggression and a violation of its sovereignty. Meanwhile, Mohamud's arrival in Asmara was announced by his office and the Eritrean Information Ministry in separate posts on X, accompanied by pictures of him being welcomed by Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. Also on Monday, Djibouti said it was following with great concern the tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia and called for dialogue between the two nations to de-escalate the situation. Djibouti, currently head of the regional grouping IGAD, said it was pursuing efforts with member states to resolve the crisis. Just days before the Ethiopia deal, Djibouti had hosted talks that saw Somalia and Somaliland agree to resume dialogue after years of stalemate. And this is where we bring up also this editorial cartoon here. Part of what you see is mine to share. Let's begin with you, Dr. Khanenje.
Yeah, it's a very interesting development, indeed. It is interesting. In certain aspects, it's shocking regarding to the timing, but it's not exactly surprising that it is happening. This past year, it has become very clear that Addis Ababa has been dissatisfied with its constrained access to the Red Sea and access to the sea in general. Now, as a landlocked country, Addis Ababa sees access to the sea as an existential necessity for them to be able to take care of the interest of the 120 million people. Now, the fallout and the eventual independence of Eritrea denied Addis Ababa the natural access that they had to the port of Massawa. And what that meant is Addis Ababa has gone through extreme efforts in trying to have access to the sea. That's why today as we speak, 90% of the port business in the port of Djibouti actually comes from Addis Ababa. I think the challenge to Addis Ababa, at least I think in their own calculation, it's very, very far and it's very, very costly. Part of the interest for Addis Ababa, of course, in our LAPSET project, of course, is also informed by, the need to access the port and the ocean. And, of course, LAPSET has not gone as planned. Well, we hope as Kenyans that perhaps, that discussion can be picked up and that dream is not, it just doesn't die like that. But then Ethiopia is a critical component of the success of the LAPSET project anyway. Now, with regard now to Somaliland, I think some of us see it as a very convenient way to kind of establish certain facts on the ground and perhaps push, Somalia in general into making certain concessions with regard to Ethiopia's access. Now, by fronting the possibility of having naval forces there, you may ask yourself a question: why would a landlocked country be developing a navy? And the only reason is so they can actually ensure they can secure the strategic access, to the sea. Now, this is something a lot of us believe, especially in the region, that could have been negotiated, but could only be negotiated within the framework, of course, of an assumed united Somalia. Recently, the government of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has tried, I think, to restart the reconciliation talks with Hargeisa. What that means, of course, is these talks are probably now dead on arrival. Now, ultimately, the only way, for instance, Addis Ababa can have access to the sea, especially through Somalia, is when there is going to be an agreed framework. Because short of that, what you're talking about is a potential conflict in the region, increasing tensions. While Mogadishu may not exactly be in a position right now to undertake a military confrontation with Ethiopia, it is going to complicate the ability of, for instance, the regional countries within IGAD, with the Horn of Africa, to stabilize Somalia. A potential military framework, for instance, in post-ATMIS Somalia, the one that may not include, Ethiopia, of course, is going to be something that is going to be troubling, considering that Ethiopia is one of the frontier countries when it comes to what is happening in Somalia, and it has a critical interest in the stabilization of the united Somalia, for instance. And so what this does is it literally kind of adds a kind of some fuel to the fires that are now burning, across the Horn of Africa, from Sudan, of course, to the internal conflict going on in Ethiopia, and now the emerging tensions. And it complicates the diplomacy in the region. Now, what that means for us as Kenya is now there's going to be a lot more on the plate to try and resolve. And in part because Kenya enjoys good relations with virtually all countries in the IGAD, outside, of course, the current contentious relations is having with Sudan, or at least with a section of the Sudanese leadership. And that perhaps efforts by the surviving IGAD member states, but most critically, using the African Union framework, they're going to be critical in ensuring that there has to be some kind of a negotiated settlement to this. Because lack of resolution of the ongoing tensions are going to, I think, inflame fires and more fires. They may not be extremely immediately hot fires, but there may be fires nonetheless that will militate against the ability that the region is seeking in terms of making efforts to resolve conflicts, both in Sudan, ongoing conflict in Ethiopia, as well as ensuring they stabilize Somalia in ways that is actually going to make it a full member of not just the Horn of Africa, but East African community. So this is not exactly good news, but it also, I think, brings us to the subject of some of the underlying issues that some countries have been facing within the region, including what I think Addis Ababa feels has been its constrained access to the sea. And perhaps to add an extra point, and I'm not trying to play the devil's advocate here, but the formation of the Red Sea Council that was run by the Gulf states that excluded Ethiopia because of argument that it's not a Red Sea country, it is something that really infuriated Addis Ababa. And they did not take it very lightly. And so I think they want to demonstrate that even that presence, the Djibouti business is actually its business. It's not exactly the Djiboutian business per se, and that it needs to have a say when it comes to the affairs of the Red Sea. It's very critical. That is why the Horn of Africa has become the new frontier of global geopolitics, not just from the Gulf countries, but from across the world.
All right, Peter Kawanja.
I think we cannot have this discussion without mentioning Meles Zenawi. He was a great success. He was a great leader for Ethiopia, perhaps the greatest prime minister that Ethiopia has ever had, and possibly one of the greatest modernizers of our time, an intellectual in his own right and so on. But the dark side of him is that he allowed Ethiopia to lose the seaport. Because during the negotiation for the transition to Eritrea's independence, he should have been able to get a corridor to Assab, which is the traditional port for Ethiopia for thousands of years. Assab, north of Assab, is the port of Adulis, which is now more of a monument than a port. But Assab, it was basically the lifeline. This is the port where the Queen of Sheba went through to see Solomon, and Ethiopia was born. I think that the modern Ethiopia is conceived, the Solomonic dynasty, and so on. So that was the beginning of the problem. But the big question was...
You make it sound like Ethiopia was born and like it was a consummation of the visit.
No. It's a Solomonic dynasty. That's
what I like to know.
Yeah, that's it. So the port of Assab has a connection with the birth of modern Ethiopia, if you wish, because that's where the queen and others went. And Assab also meant the military power of Ethiopia, because Assab was a naval base for this. Abiy could not have won the war in Eritrea without Assab. This is where the drones came from to basically pound and win the war against the Tigrayans. And therefore, what we find now is a kind of revisionist approach to these issues. And when Abiy announced that he's going to get a port in the Red Sea peacefully or at war, the immediate people to react were the Tigrayans. And the statement from Tigray, from not Tigrayans, but the Eritreans, the statement from Eritrea was terse, but they were already provoked. And as such, we are saying this action, this particular action, the agreement on Somaliland, is basically now the lightning rod for a conflict in the Horn. Why is that? The facts are clear. In Ethiopia want a 12-kilometer stretch of land, leased to it for 50 years, but not necessarily for commercial reasons, but for naval reasons, because it wants to reconstruct its navy from there. And that, of course, will not go down, cannot go down well with Mogadishu. If it was a port for commercial purposes and so on, it would not have been a bigger issue. But remember, this is not the first time Ethiopia is going for that port. They had an agreement which were more commercial through the UAE, and which expired last year. They lost the agreement because we were not able to implement what was agreed upon, which is basically that they will be shareholders in the port of Beira. Now, here we are. We have this agreement and the statement that was made earlier, and the country, the whole region is not at peace. Why? Because Abiy is not the kind of a person who is going to let it go like that. He has waged 3 wars in 5 years and is now basically stoking the 4th one. War against the Oromo Liberation Front, war against the Tigrayan Liberation Front, now war against the Faso in the Amhara in Ethiopia. And when you stoke this fight for the Red Sea, then that would be the 4th fight in 5 years. But why Somaliland? Because Somalia can't fight Ethiopia now. It's weak. It is fighting Al-Shabaab. So basically it is looking for the weak event. Now, what does that mean? It means that Eritrea will have to preempt that. So what is it doing? It is alleged, I have no facts, that it is the one that is supporting the Amhara fighters. It is now, Somalia and Eritrea have again got a rapprochement. They are now together. And Egypt has crossed over. Now it is in Somalia, because of their old rivalry over the dam. So we are seeing a matrix of new fault lines of conflict that are emerging, riding on old conflict, but triggered by this new desire of the Ethiopian to reconstruct the imperial past, where it has access to the sea, it has a strong navy, it has a strong army, and so on. But is it realistic on part of Abiy? Yes. If I was in Abiy's position, I would want to be Ethiopia, to all intents and purposes, is a regional power. 120 million people. The largest army in the military in the region, army for that matter. And what do? You've got to get a port, but at what cost? This is what we are looking at. A realistic kind of aspiration for a country with that power to get a seaport and construct a navy. And these days, with the new technology, you cannot wage a war without a navy, because you need the navy to launch your drones, to launch your other technologies. So Abiy catches himself in a very tight corner that he must get a navy. He must get a port that can execute that. During the time of Farmajo, the consideration was not Beira. It was actually Kismayu and Berbera, and now Kismayu. And that brought tensions with Kenya. If you remember, we had a lot of tensions with Ethiopia at that time. Subterranean though, but they were there. Because it was looking for a port on the Indian Ocean, not on the Red Sea, because of not want to antagonize Eritrea. So the point is, the region is no longer at ease.
So where is Kenya ensconced in this? Because now we, just as the Sudan, also we've been accused of taking sides with Somaliland.
No, in this particular case, Kenya has no alternative but to back Somalia. Because consistently our policy is non-interference.
At the chagrin of Somaliland?
Yeah,
at the chagrin of Somaliland?
No, Somaliland is not a country. I mean, let me speak as a Kenyan. Somaliland is not a country. I mean, you cannot tell me at the expense of Mandera. Mandera is not a country. It's a county. At the expense of Garissa, Garissa is not a country. No, let's be honest. Let's be fair to Somalia. Somaliland is the sixth.
But why has been proffered
as the sixth? It is the sixth region of Somalia, constitutionally. And we as Kenyans in Bagathi are the one who negotiated it. It is not Ethiopia, it's not Djibouti, it is us as Kenyans in Bagathi who negotiated Somaliland as the sixth region of Somalia. So we cannot go back and now behave that Somaliland is. But we can get consular services. We have consular services in Los Angeles.
Yes.
We have, many countries have consular services in Chicago. That does not mean they recognize Illinois as an independent state in the United States. No, that's not the point. Ethiopia has had a consulate in Somaliland as long as I can remember. And Kenya, there were issues, but at least we can have a consulate there. But that does not mean you recognize Somaliland as an independent state. And no country in the world has recognized, and it is the main problem now is that it appears by signing this agreement, Ethiopia is almost recognizing Somaliland as an independent state. Because as a country, you cannot sign an agreement with a constituent member of another country. Legally, that is the violation. Ethiopia crossed the line when it assumed that it's going to sign a 50-year lease with a constituent member of Somalia. And that is not right. So Kenya is within the bound of legitimacy. It is fairly legitimate because we are the ones who negotiated Somaliland as the sixth region of Somalia.
How does the Foreign Relations Committee identify Somaliland?
Well, I mean, we are a rules-based country, and it's very clear that, in fact, as has been said by the professor, that we don't recognize Somaliland as an independent entity. We respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Somalia, which now has also become a member of the East African community.
Yep.
So our relationship is very clear on that. Secondly, the Ethiopia action is imperial grab. Ethiopia is going for something that we thought didn't exist in the 21st century, for a powerful country to make claims on the territory of another country. And this is a very serious violation. Surprisingly, Ethiopia is the headquarters of the African Union, whose raison d'etre, the foundation on which it sits, is the respect to the existing colonial borders, sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all member states. So here, someone is playing against the rules that have been in place. And Ethiopia itself has been a beneficiary of that policy, given the fact that huge chunks of Ethiopia are populated by Somali-speaking population. And the two countries have gone to war on issue of land and people. So it is a very sensitive issue of historical importance for the region. And unless there is some sober minds and we take a step back, this is going to be a very serious problem for the region. But let me demystify Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a modern creation. Ethiopia did not exist before the Second World War. What we are talking about is the historical Abyssinia, Tigranian, Aksum empires that existed in the north, which does not include Oromia, it does not include the Afar land, it does not include the Somali territories, it does not include the huge population in southern Ethiopia, the southern states. So Ethiopia has never had access to the sea apart from a very short period in its history. And this is when it incorporated Eritrea. After the independence of Eritrea, Eritrea entered a confederal arrangement with Ethiopia. And in 1962, Emperor Haile Selassie decided to absorb, to take Eritrea into Ethiopia without the consent of the Eritrean people. And that sparked off one of the longest running military conflicts in Africa that eventually led to the independence of Eritrea. And within a short time after Eritrea came into being, Ethiopia lost every access to the sea. So it hasn't had really that historical claim. Now, Prime Minister Abiy wants to recreate that glory of imperial Abyssinia, imperial Ethiopia. And he feels that Ethiopia is not complete because there are many landlocked countries that are doing very well. Uganda is landlocked. Many other countries in Asia and America and Europe are landlocked, and they are doing very well as countries. So the argument, but here he is not only interested in a port because he has Djibouti, provides all the needs, and is the closest point to Addis Ababa. Djibouti is, yes. So Somaliland is a little bit farther, and it is a disputed issue. So what he wants is a naval presence. And what would you want to do with a naval power, naval presence? It's imperial power. You want to have control of the seas, the maritime services that are out there, and an ambition to dominate others. And this is a very dangerous movement. And I think it would be a terrible mistake to underestimate Somalia, because there is the non-state actors factor that is not looked at. Somalia may not have a military force capable of confronting Ethiopia at the moment, but it has a very strong segment of non-state actors that could spring up anytime. And if you look at the equation, Ethiopia is going through multiple conflicts. It had the Tigranian conflict, which 1 million, up to 1 million people, experts say, died there. There is the conflict in Oromia, as has been mentioned, which is a contested area. There is the conflict in the Amhara region. So it is not stable. And then if you look at Somaliland, Somaliland has been relatively peaceful. It had been able to put its act together, but recently it has been unraveling with conflict in the east. Now, this particular agreement with Ethiopia is accelerating the instability of Somaliland. And with Somalia and Eritrea getting involved, even its future stability is in doubt if they do not, if they're not careful, which is something that has been expressed in the streets of Borama, in other parts of Somaliland. There is already a concern that this particular agreement may seriously destabilize Somaliland,
right?
And remove any possibility of reconciliation or some kind of political agreement, which would maybe accommodate Somaliland and its future within the Somalia conflict, Somalia context.
Right. If I may just pose a question also to you, Huiton, do you think the Nobel Laureate Committee, the awarding committee right now, rules the day that they gave this particular award to Prime Minister of Ethiopia?
One of the things that's been a question for many of us is really the inability of the Nobel Laureate Committee to strip Nobel laureates once they commit crimes against humanity, once they dishonor the grounds on which they've been awarded. Within Amnesty International, we have something not as grandiose and not as powerful as the Nobel Prize, but we have our own ambassadorship, which we do strip people. So Aung San Suu Kyi, for example, was stripped of her status as an ambassador of conscience because we felt that she had essentially betrayed the faith that she was bestowed when she was elected, or she was in, I guess she was selected. So I think that is something to ask a question. But I think more importantly, there is, I think, some disappointment among many in terms of his leadership. He came in with great expectations, expectations not just in terms of stabilizing Ethiopia, democratizing Ethiopia, restoring Ethiopia to a country that understood free and fair elections, a free press, and safety and protection for all Ethiopians. And there was a feeling that perhaps there would be a stabilization of the federal project, and that has not happened. In fact, we've just seen it disintegrate over the last 5 years, and now we have that expanding into the region. And the question I think that occurred to me as I listened to Daktari speaking is, 4 conflicts now in 5 years. That we often say that when something happens, it's an incident. When it happens twice, it's a coincidence. When it happens 3 times or more, it's a contradiction. The question is, is the style of leadership deliberately producing these conflicts or stoking these conflicts for a particular reason? But I think we have to say the situation is precarious. It is also unfolding. So we've had 2 different things happening in the last 1 week. The Ethiopians and the Somaliland leadership have been talking about a military cooperation pact. That's a worrying sign. And on the other side, we have seen, or we have heard that from IGAD that there have been attempts by the Ethiopian government to reach out to Somalia on this issue. So I guess it's unfolding, and unfortunately, it's just one more for those good people on Harambee Avenue at Harambee House, the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, to sort out because it affects us and the region.
Indeed. We head over now to Congo, lastly, where Election Commission said it has cancelled votes cast for 82 of 101,000 legislative candidates in the disputed December general election over alleged fraud and other issues. Fresh opposition calls for a rerun of the vote. Those disqualified include contenders for national, provincial and municipal assemblies, the results of which are yet to be published amid the fallout from the December 20th poll that threatens to further destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo, a top producer of cobalt and Africa's second largest country. Seni Election Committee, that is their body, statement on Friday did not address the presidential vote that also took place on December the 20th, handing President Felix Tshisekedi a landslide victory. 4 acting provincial governors and 3 government ministers were among the 82 excluded. Seni's move has not appeased the opposition, many of whom accuse the commission of helping tip the election in Tshisekedi's favor. Teresa Kibaluga, a political analyst at Congo's Ebuteli Research Institute, said it was difficult to see how such irregularities had not also affected the presidential election, especially considering that all these ballots were conducted on the same day with the same electronic voting device. And it was quite unfortunate also just seeing one of the senior officials, if you watch that particular video on social media, being beaten, black and blue. It was so dehumanizing for a woman as well, being stripped naked, kicked all over. And of course, this just goes to show that still, when it comes to election, very contentious, very emotive issue in the country, we don't care whether you're a man or a woman. If people seem, or they have a feeling that it has not been a fair and justified results, then they'll do whatever manner of thing they can to Dr. Kanenje.
I think it was expected that Tshisekedi was actually going to win this election. No one thought that there was a fair playing, ground for the election. but considering the history, even 5 years ago, it was very clear that Tshisekedi went into this election a clear favorite. He exploited the very nationalistic sentiment, especially against M23 and Rwanda, to whip up people's emotions and be able to mobilize support. And even if under the best circumstances, considering the political climate within the country and just the polarization that existed at the time, he was still going to profit extensively from that kind of sentiment. And so at the very worst, he would still have gotten into high 50s, even under the best circumstances within Congo, just considering the kind of tension that have been going on in the Great Lakes region. Now, for Congo, for better or for worse, this is actually progress, that there's been an election, and for the second time, of course, after Kabila. And Kabila is not, of course, in power. But at the same time, it also demonstrates that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in the DRC. There was a lot of abuses, that preceded, this election. There was a lot of human rights violations that, went on. And yeah, there is a lot of electoral malfeasance, even during the time of the elections. Not to mention, a lot of people in Eastern DRC in particular were actually unable either to register or even to vote. Now, when it comes to credibility and legitimacy, look at the number of people, percentage of Congolese who registered to vote and actually who voted. It is not even a number to write home about. I think you have less than perhaps 15% of population, voting. Can you really call that legitimate and credible? This is a country with more than 105 million people. And you only have a small percentage of them being able to even have access to the voting booth and actually casting the vote, if that vote counted at all. And so there is a lot that needs to be done with regard to building the kind of infrastructure that's going to build confidence. Remember, Congo or DRC is one of the countries that has seen the most conflict in Africa. I don't think there is a time when it's not been in trouble. The first Secretary General of the United Nations actually died in the DRC. It has had the longest peacekeeping mission of any country, I think, in the world. And still we're having these issues. Today, as we speak, following the rejection or the end of the lack of renewal of the East African Regional Force, SADC forces have deployed. They were there before. Of course, they didn't make much progress. They are there again. What is it going to mean? Now, if we go by President Tshisekedi's own rhetoric, he literally was threatening war against, for instance, Rwanda. Is this going to mean that we're going to see interstate conflict within the East Africa region? Now, what will that portend, for instance, for the East African community? Now that we just in the process of including, or rather, accommodating Somalia as the next member, DRC does not seem to be playing ball on a number of areas. It suffers from extensive, of course, violations in terms of human rights and basic freedoms of information, freedom of the press and stuff like that. Do we, even as East African community, now need to look back and say, now we need to start setting certain standards for the community? So it does not seem to be a club just for all the corrupt and all the failed states.
All right, thank you. Peter Kagwanja, briefly.
I think I would just write on the analysis that has been done by Dr. Hanenge regarding this election to make 2 points. The first point is that we must be able to distinguish between capacity and what we are calling fair or good election. Congo is the size of the whole of Western Europe and has been plundered for centuries and later on for decades by its own post-colonial leaders. And therefore, Congo is very different from Kenya. And if in Kenya we have difficulties administering, polls in the northern part, the northern belt of our country, just imagine Congo. We coming from the now Atlantic to the heartland of Eastern Africa. It is very difficult. I don't know what kind of barometer or measure you would use to talk about a fair election or a good election. So we must always treat democratic elections in Congo as elsewhere as still work in progress. and therefore you cannot put these parameters. And one wonders whether it is the fairness or the justice in this election which is at question, or geopolitical interests. In many cases, if you remember the first election for Sekedi, President Kenyatta, Ramaphosa, I think that time was Jacob Zuma, they stood up in support of Congo, and Sekedi without Kenya and South Africa would not have really stood. Major countries, France, Rwanda and Uganda and others had basically said that this election is not. Even the African Union that time, the chairman was the president of Rwanda. The sitting president was the president of Rwanda. So it took a fight amongst the Africans to make Congo stand. And in this particular regard, I think Sekedi has gotten some muscle, so he can now fight for himself. But at that time, he was very, very vulnerable. So it is always good to look at it that way. The second point I wanted to make is more general. It does not apply to Congo alone. It applies to all. And we must begin to question the role of democracy in divided societies. Where Congo talks about the Rigaraphone and Swahiliphone, we have the largely it is Francophone, but majority of the populations are aligned to Anglophone countries like Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and so on. And then you begin to wonder, is this majoritarian democracy really the solution, or what should Africa do? Shouldn't we have a conference as Africans to decide about the parameters of our democracy, as opposed to the liberal democracy as we know it? Because why should you take this dose, which every time you take it, there is going to be war? Now, which country, even our country here, we're still suffering the shocks, and we are among the most successful democracies on the continent. And we're still having the aftershocks of the 2022 elections. You go to Tanzania, they are now dealing with the aftershocks of the Magufuli era. You go to Ethiopia, they went to war primarily because the government in Mogadishu, in Addis Ababa, refused to go for democracy. So as scholars, I think this is more of a challenge to the scholarly part of the world to see whether there is a way in which we can make democracy compliant with our needs. At the moment, it is generating instability.
Thank you.
And it must be said.
Thank you. Yeah. Right, briefly, even as we prepare our headline thoughts, I've got only 5 minutes to go. Let's just hear from you briefly, Irungu Hutu.
So, I guess that's what you call stepping the member of parliament, overstepping to the citizen. Would you like to go first?
No,
it's okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
So he said he was going to conclude.
Yeah.
Oh, he said he was going
even
to conclude.
as we consider giving our as we consider.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of reflections. The first is that the Congolese are not very different from Kenyans or any nationality across the world. They deserve education, they deserve health, they deserve safety, they deserve protection, they deserve the widest of opportunities to be prosperous people, to be safe, and essentially to build their own countries. And therefore, any process that undermines that, I think, has to be condemned, not just by human rights activists, but I think by all citizens, given that that's what we hold as being a modern state, a modern society. I thought Prof on my right here was going to go as far as a late president who once argued that Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is non-viable, and that actually it should be split up and divided into smaller countries. And he did say, just for the sake of remembering history, he did say at some point that the key to Burundian and Rwandese stability was just to move the Hutus and Tutsis simultaneously into each other's countries, and everything would be okay. There have been lots of theories about DRC and Rwanda and Burundi. Now, Prof did not say that. But I think what's really important to distinguish is the ideal of democracy, the standards that are now acceptable globally, and in the context of the Africa, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. And I think that's the standard. For me, that debate is over, right? If you come to govern in an African context, you have an obligation to secure the human rights of your people, to govern transparently, to accept that you are not the only person that can govern, and therefore you have term limits and so on. I think, coming back to the Congo, lastly, as Amnesty International, we are not pronouncing any view on the elections. It's probably way beyond our competency, but I think it's important to recognize that there are very important Congolese leaders who were not involved in the political contestation, like the Archbishop of Kinshasa, who said that this was, and I quote, a gigantic organized disorder. Now, it was probably translated from French, so it probably sounds better in French or Lingala. But I think the point to make on this one, you have a population of 110 million people. 44 million people were eligible to vote. 14 million people stayed away, so 25% of the electorate chose not to go to the polls. And you've had all these irregularities. So the first question we need to ask ourselves, is the leadership, I guess, up for the challenge of governing this complex and very unwieldy country?
Right, thank you. Very briefly from you, Yusuf Hassan, as well.
Well, I think President Tshisekedi planned and executed his objective, which was to win this election. And the world allowed him that. And he used underhand methods. For example, the demonization of one of his candidates, presidential candidates, Mose Katumbi, to say that he was a foreigner, of a foreign father and a foreign mother. His mother is from the southern region, which borders Zambia. He demonized the Tutsi minority using M23 as a lighting rod to raise the anger of the Congolese population. But the question now is, now that he has won the elections, and winning an election is not democracy. An election is just a process in which people vote to choose one individual against the process. Is he going to become a pragmatic statesman, knowing his limitations, the fact that he does not have a very strong political support, there's a lot of opposition to him, and also, is he, now that he has won, is he going to sort of de-escalate his conflict with Rwanda? Because this is going to destabilize the whole region.
Thank you.
He's not capable of winning a war against Rwanda. Secondly, the M23 is not challenging his presidency. M23 doesn't want to be to take control of Congo. They want to be recognized, and they want the rights of the Tutsi minorities to be recognized, which is a legitimate call. So he has to come to terms with the realities of Kivu.
Thank you.
And find a political, peaceful settlement to both his external problems as well as external relations.
Right, being hounded out of studio right now, my music is up. So I'll just give each of you 10 seconds. 10 seconds, beginning with you, Dr. Kanenje, and one-liner. 10 seconds. You even that moment of silence is...
Yes, I think this is for the President and the government of Kenya. As 2024 is going to be a year of turmoil within the region, and the President and the government cannot afford to play favorites in mediation. And that is why, despite the pressures from outside, diplomatic issues, I think the President and Kenya should remain neutral.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter Kagwanja.
For me, we have to work to stop being a microwave nation. Our policies need to be well prepared. Our students need to be well prepared. Everything that we do need to be well prepared.
Thank you.
Microwave nation, no.
It's a no-no. Right.
2 days ago, I watched the BBC Eye on Africa expose on TB Joshua.
Yeah.
And it is shocking, it is horrific, but it is a reminder that crimes can be committed from the pulpit, and it is important that we regulate religious organizations in the spirit, particularly those that come from the prosperity gospel. My last thought is with the Shakahola Senate report that was finalized towards the end of last year. We need to keep our eye on that. We lost almost 600 Kenyans in Shakahola. It seems that it's yesterday's news, but we need to make sure that it does not happen again.
Thank you. 10 seconds.
Well, yes, my concern is focused completely differently, and it's a local issue. Schools have opened. We have started the bursary process in our neighborhoods. This Monday, we got 6,000 parents applying for bursaries. We don't have the CDF money, bursary money yet. I call upon the government to accelerate that process, to provide the funds so that these kids can go back to school as the new term starts.
Right. We thought the president actually announced that it's hit your accounts. So we're surprised that most of the legislators are actually, decrying the fact that they've not received the monies. But nonetheless, we hope that it should reflect. Maybe it is still grey. Now when you go, it will be, a tick will be on it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your contribution. This maiden, of course, show this year. We hope to see more of you, of course, this year as well. Thank you so much for making time this morning to educate Kenyans. We really do appreciate also your valid company. We're stuck for time. I will have run you by the international publications just to give you the headlines, but we'll do that next week. Thank you. You've been watching Global Today. Enjoy the rest of the show. Our viewing here on KT News. News Diary is up next.